Hello, and how are you feeling? Welcome to Series 3, Episode 5 of Coaching from Not a Blue Tree with me, Gary Burns. And this episode is all about rapport. So, what is rapport? I think we know when we've got it, we know when it's there, and we know how good it feels when it's there, and we're equally aware of when it's not, and how uncomfortable and how challenging that can make our interaction with others. So rapport is that sense of connection, that sense of being synchronized, in sync with another person. There is a sense of trust, a level of trust and understanding. And communication feels very, very fluid, very easy. And it allows us to move beyond the superficial into the stuff that really matters. And that for me is why rapport is so important. Of all the skills that we learn, I think rapport comes at the very top of the list. And the reason it comes at the very top of the list is because everything that we do, and that's our interactions on a personal, on a professional, and on an intimate level, requires us to communicate and communicate effectively. And the greater the rapport, the more easily we can do that. And it comes down to the sense of rapport is that being able to trust the other person, of there being a level of trust and a level of connectivity between two people, that communication can then flow freely and easily. And if rapport is there, even if the conversation is a difficult one, either because of the topic being covered, or sometimes it's just finding the words to express yourself, you know you're going to be allowed the time and the space to do that because the rapport is there. And of course, when working with people, if we want to be able to support someone through change, whatever that change may be, building rapport is an essential first step. And just take a moment to think about the people in your life. Think about the people you work with or you spend time with professionally. Think about the people that make up your social life, your friends, your family group. Think of the person or the people you're in an intimate relationship with. And just for a moment, think about the times when it's really uncomfortable. Maybe less so with those very close to us, but certainly on a professional level and with people we meet from time to time, acquaintances and so on, and how uncomfortable it can be and how difficult communication can be when that rapport is just not there. And the curious thing about rapport is we build it all of the time. This is not someone somewhere sitting there thinking, how can I create a theory and a model? Quite the opposite. We build rapport all of the time, and people have observed it and modelled it to understand what the process is. And again, you'll have met people who were very good at building rapport. Indeed, that may be you. You might find it very easy to connect with people, to put people at ease. And you may be on the other end of the spectrum. You find it incredibly difficult. Or you spend a lot of time with people who really don't ever build rapport. So it's going on all around us, and it's happening all of the time. But the reason we talk about it in the context of NLP and in the context of learning a skill, if you understand what constitutes rapport, you can then start to use those skills, use that information to build rapport a little bit more quickly. Because what you're doing, if you're aware of what will assist in building that rapport, you can put those techniques into practice and speed up the process. And sometimes that's an incredibly useful skill to have. Particularly, but not limited though, but particularly in the world of work, and sometimes in the interaction we have with friends and acquaintances. I think particularly though in the world of work, and whether that's in the workplace, whether we're accessing professional services as a client, as a customer, we want to get the very best from others, and we want to make sure that what we're doing flows smoothly. And by understanding the skills, we can bring that directly into play. So what are those skills? And it comes down to 3 separate parts. The first part being matching and mirroring, the second part being active listening, and the third part being sensory acuity. So those 3 things together, if we can master all of those, they are the key components of building rapport. They are the key components that we do naturally all of the time. Some of us better than others, as we've already mentioned. But by understanding what they are and how to use them, that certainly can facilitate that connection and can allow us to build that all-important rapport. So let's start with matching and mirroring. Now, matching and mirroring comes from the sense that we like people who are like us. So we like to see the similarities. We like to think that we're on the same wavelength. And matching and mirroring, a couple of techniques that allow us to do that in a way which allows that connection to build more rapidly. Matching and mirroring takes place on various levels. The first is on a physical level. So on a physical level, it's about matching and mirroring the gestures, the body language, the way they sit, the way they stand, the way they hold themselves, and matching that, mirroring that, to build that sense of connection. But here's the really important thing about matching and mirroring. It's not about becoming a mimic. It's not about standing there and trying to replicate exactly what the other person is doing. To do that, firstly, is incredibly difficult. But equally, I'm sure you, like me, have experienced times when people have mimicked you, and it actually feels very unpleasant, and is usually done in a very unkind way. Sometimes for a bit of fun, sure we've all been there as well, but quite a lot of the time it can be done quite unkindly. So what we're looking to do is understand what those physical gestures, those physical behaviours are, and replicate them in a way which is subtle, which goes unnoticed by the other person. So we're looking to do this in a way which doesn't alert their conscious mind, but simply allows the unconscious mind to connect in and think there is a sense of connection here. So how does that work in practice? So very simply, if you're sitting with someone and you observe how they're sitting, are they sitting with their legs crossed? Are they sitting with their legs apart? Are their legs crossed at the knee? Are their legs crossed at the ankle? Where are their arms? What are they doing with their arms and with their hands? How are they actually sitting in the chair? Are they sitting upright? Are they sitting quite slumped? Do they look like they're sitting comfortably? Are they perched on the edge, or are they sat back in the chair? There's a whole host there of physical manifestations which give us cues as to how we might match and mirror that. So we're sitting down. You become aware that the person has their legs crossed. Now, you may eventually decide to cross your legs. You may want to do that in exactly the same way as they're sitting. Cross your legs at the knee, cross your legs at the ankle. Sit with your feet firmly on the floor, sit with your knees slightly apart. So when you do that, you are exactly matching, you are directly mirroring what the other person is doing. The clever thing about this, though, is that if they are sitting with their legs crossed, and that's an uncomfortable position to sit in for you, for whatever reason, rather than crossing your legs at the knee, you might choose to cross your legs at the ankle. If they're sitting left leg over right knee, you might want to put left ankle over right ankle, mirroring the gesture that they are making, but not relying on it being exactly the same. Similarly, what are they doing with their hands and arms? If their hands and arms are resting calmly in their lap, you might want to adopt a similar position. If there's someone who gestures a lot, and this is always an interesting one, some people, as you will be well aware, talk a lot with their hands, and that may feel very uncomfortable for you. Now, this is the art of matching and mirroring, because matching and mirroring is not saying you have to be as demonstrative as the other person, particularly if they're like some people who really do talk a lot with their hands. But make sure when you are talking, you don't leave your hands static in your lap, and that you do move your hands, move your arms around a little bit. You don't have to take it to the same level. But again, what that other person on an unconscious level picks up on is the similarity, that there is similar behavior. May not be as extreme, may not be as obvious, may not be as manifesting, but they will pick up on it's there. And this is where the rapport comes apart, because if you're talking with someone who is very demonstrative in when they talk, and they do so in a certain way, and you are the complete opposite, it breaks that sense of connection. It breaks that sense of we like people who are like us. And again, the matching and mirroring doesn't have to be immediate. So people, when they're sitting, particularly if they're sitting for a while, shift position. And I'm aware now, particularly in professional settings where I do want to match and mirror. So if someone's crossed their legs and then they uncross them for a while, I may have crossed my legs at the knee or at the ankle to match and mirror, but I'm not going to immediately follow suit when they take the change of position. So I may wait until the point where I am talking, and at that point, I will uncross my legs as well. And that's how you keep some of these things below the level of consciousness. Because what you want is the other person to be consciously unaware of what you're doing. You want their unconscious mind to pick up, though, on the similarities, the way that we are being the same. And the same goes for language, and this is always an interesting one. We think we all speak the same language, and to a large extent we do. There are, though, words and phrases that we all use a lot. They become quite personal to us. There are also words which can take on various meanings and can mean slightly different things for different people. And the word that always springs to mind for me when I talk about this is the word weird. Because for me, weird means unusual, something a bit different, but I don't attach it being a good thing or a bad thing to it. And I was talking to someone once who very much saw the word weird, and they'd been described as weird, as something negative. It was not a word they were comfortable with. And it was interesting, first of all, picking up on that difference, and then making sure I used that word in the context that they were using it when discussing their situation. Now, I wasn't giving a judgment on how they used the word. I was simply reflecting it back, because by hearing my words and my reflection, it gives the messages, A, I'm listening, I perhaps use language in a similar way. So again, that builds that connection, builds that rapport. And it's also important to pick up on what type of language are people using. Some people use quite short sentences, don't use big, long words, in which case, if you're matching and mirroring, you would do the same. You would keep your language as simple as possible. Doesn't mean you can't drop in the occasional longer word, the occasional longer sentence. But it's about thinking about how are they communicating to you, and how do you communicate back again. And one of the things with communication, it's not just about the words we use. It's about the delivery of the words as well. Some people speak very quickly. Some people really speak quite slowly. Some people are very loud and strident. Others are much more softly spoken. Now, you will have your own rhythm of speech. You will have your own way of speaking. And again, it's not about being a mimic here. Indeed, if you started mimicking someone's voice, I think that's probably the biggest way to break rapport, unless you're in a very humorous context. What it does mean, though, is if you've got someone who's quite strident in their speech, you may want to adopt a similar tone. You don't perhaps have to match them full on, but you may certainly want to up the volume, up the pace, up the strength of how you're speaking. Similarly, if someone is quite slowly spoken, you might want to drop your speed of delivery. And again, if someone speaks quite quickly, you may want to make some effort to match that, perhaps not at the speed the other person is speaking, but perhaps faster than the speed at which you would normally speak. And then the same goes with the tone, the tonality of how you speak. Some people have quite deep voices, some people have quite high-pitched voices. Again, your voice will have its own tonality, its own timbre, which is what you would use most of the time. But sometimes, particularly if you're picking up on what they've said, as you reflect back, you might want to adopt a tone, pitch that is closer to theirs than you might normally use. And that can be done to great effect. It takes a bit of practice. But if you really want to give the sense of you've heard something really important that the other person has shared with you, reflecting that back at a similar speed, using similar language, at a similar pace, with a similar tone, adds great reassurance to the person because it means they've been heard, but heard beyond the words, heard beyond the actual words they put together to form the sentences. And it's much more about the meaning that sits behind it. And all of this you have to do, as I've said before, without drawing attention to what you're actually doing here. And one of the things I've noticed, and one of the examples I use quite a lot, I've worked with a lot of men over the years. And what I've noticed with a lot of men, not all men, but with quite a lot of men, if they start to talk about something that's very personal, very intimate to them, and it's not something that they would routinely be sharing, I find a lot of men drop the volume, they speak a little bit more slowly, and they quite often adopt a posture of leaning slightly inwards, as though they're wanting to close the gap. They're wanting to sort of put a barrier, almost like a barrier of protection around the two of us, so that what they're sharing with me doesn't go anywhere else. And it's quite powerful when that happens. Firstly, because they feel they're in a position to be able to do that sharing. So that suggests already there's a good level of rapport. But when that happens, to build upon that, I too lean in a little bit. Because by doing that, I'm suggesting, okay, I understand you want the protection. Let's pull this circle in a little bit more then. I too will drop my tone. I too will speak a little bit more slowly. Giving them the sense we are in a safe, protected bubble almost, where we are speaking the same language, we are approaching this in the same way. And it's really interesting that when you make that effort, when you realize what you can do, and how powerful it is as a process, what a difference it can make. And on the matching and mirroring, it is really interesting to observe, if you're out and about, to observe groups of people. Bars, restaurants, anywhere where people gather together as groups is a good way to observe this. Because what you see, if you've got a group that really is in rapport, you will see the group matching and mirroring throughout. You will see the way their body language flows through the group. You will notice there are times when the group becomes collectively quite loud and then quietens down again. You will notice, particularly if it's in bars or restaurants, how people will stop and take a drink at the same time because they've all picked up on the lull in the conversation. That's a moment for a drink, and then conversation starts up again. If you can listen, I know you don't really want to be eavesdropping, but you will quite often hear people talking at similar volumes with similar tonality. You will quite often hear words and phrases that the group has and uses almost like their group language. And it's really powerful to see and how strong that rapport is. And equally, there will be times when you see people together where it looks really uncomfortable. And the reason that it looks really uncomfortable is because the rapport is not there. And again, observe how there is a mismatch in body language, a mismatch in the way people talk to each other, a mismatch in the tone, the speed, the volume at which they speak to each other. So take a moment the next time you're out and just watch, observe, make notes. The second part of rapport is active listening. Now, there is so much written about this. There is so much said about the importance of listening. And a lot of us would like to think that we're really good listeners. The reality, though, is an awful lot of us sit listening, waiting for a break in the conversation so that we can get our observations, our points across. And the reality is we're not really listening to what's being said. We're hearing the words, we're following the conversation, but we're not really actively listening. Because if you're actively listening, you are not looking for a gap to get your own point in. You are looking to understand what the other person is telling you. Indeed, it's one of Stephen Covey's 7 habits of highly effective people. Seek first to understand. And you can only seek to understand if you are actively listening. And what I always think is really curious about this is people will say, well, yeah, but if I'm actively listening, then how am I going to know what to ask? Or am I going to find a gap to make an observation that may be really pertinent? And what I've found, and this, I don't think I'm alone in this, but the more actively you are listening with the only intent of understanding what the other person wants to share with you, and not just the words, but what that means for them, the impact it has on them, and so on, what you find is that the questions come automatically, the observations come automatically. Because your unconscious is busy processing everything that you're listening. And it is picking up on where the gaps might be, what a relevant question might be, what a pertinent observation might be. And suddenly, before you realise, you've got a question there in your mind, there's a lull in the conversation, and you get the chance to ask that question or a chance to make that observation. And it's relevant to what the other person is saying. And that's the absolute power of absolute listening. Because it allows us to show that we are fully engaged with that person and really taking on board what they are communicating to us. Because it's not just about the words, it's the way they say the words, it's the body language, and so on. So if we're picking up on all of those cues, we get a much better sense of what the communication is all about. And think about the times when someone has actively listened to you and how good that feels to have someone's undivided attention where their focus is purely on you and understanding what you want to say. And equally, think of the times when people have simply not been listening. They've been hearing your words, but just waiting for that opportunity to jump in. And I have so many examples of things I've observed where that lack of active listening has been so painful to see. And one of the examples I go back to time after time is I worked with someone once who was about to change career. So they handed in their notice, they were going off to do some new things. And they were talking about everything they got lined up. And they were clearly very, very excited about these new opportunities and what was happening. And there were 3 or 4 of us there. And one of the people there, person who was leaving, going on to pastures new, said something. And this person immediately jumped in and said, oh, what a terrible idea. You just don't want to do that because I did this. And this is what happened. It was just awful. And it took me forever to recover. And suddenly the whole attention shifted from the excited person who was leaving who quite frankly looked like they'd been smacked in the mouth, to the person who'd had the bad experience and was bemoaning everything. And when that conversation happened, I'd started to learn about all this stuff, and I just sort of watched the rapport evaporate. And I felt incredibly sorry for the person who'd been interrupted and then had lost the group. On that occasion, I have to be honest, I was a little bit unkind to the person who interrupted. Not directly, tempted though I was to be insulting and be their harshest critic. I simply waited for an opportunity and then went back to the person who was leaving, because I wanted them to know that at least I had been listening and was really interested in what they were doing. And the truth of the matter was, I was really interested in what they were doing, because it sounded very exciting and I wanted to hear more. And I was able to bring that conversation back. But it did make me realise how quickly rapport can be lost. And the other example that I used, or that I use a lot, is I worked in an office once where we went through a time when there was quite a bit of sickness. And I'm sure most of you have been there at those times when, something's going round, give you a nasty cold, whatever, and people are off, and so it puts a lot of pressure on those who are still working. And we had a manager come down to allocate some tasks, and she got those who were in the office together, and she said, "This is the list of tasks. I'm giving this to you, that to you, that to you." And initially, everyone was kind of understanding. And then she simply said, "So I'll leave you all to it." She spun on her heels and off she went. And all the goodwill that had been there evaporated. Because I think people wanted a bit of, appreciate this is challenging, appreciate you're a bit thin on the ground, having a bit of extra work is not going to help. Please, though, do the best you can. None of that was forthcoming. It was simply, here are the tasks, and off she went. And again, you think, there's a lack of rapport there. And I think she was oblivious. But hey ho. And active listening is something we can work on. So if we find ourselves listening with a point where we've got the point we want to make and it's come up in our head and we're just hanging on there, that's the time to sort of take a step back and think, no, this isn't active listening. We need to park that. Let's just focus on what they're saying. And it can be a challenge. I kid you, I've been there. I've had to work on this. When you do work on it, though, it makes the conversation so much richer. It makes you a better listener. And it's amazing how much more you pick up on. The third part of rapport is sensory acuity. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on sensory acuity because it's going to be the subject of a future podcast. So I don't want to overly repeat myself. The thing with sensory acuity, though, this is about learning to consciously recognise the unconscious messages that we all give off at different times, almost all of the time. So it's understanding what those cues mean, which gives us insight into what the other person is telling us. Now, the thing with sensory acuity is that we do recognise those unconscious signs and signals from other people, but we do so on an unconscious level. And the trick or the skill is bringing that unconscious understanding into our consciousness. So you're thinking at the moment, probably thinking, what's that all about? What does he actually mean? This is about understanding when you get a sense when you're talking with someone that they're not being honest with you, they're hiding something, they're not giving you the full story. We get something of an alarm bell ringing, a sixth sense that something's not quite adding up. But we can't put our finger on it. And because we're not knowing what we're looking for, we can very quickly and very easily overlook it. So part of the skill is understanding that when that alarm bell starts to ring, when something just doesn't feel quite right, when something feels a bit off, that we do need to pay attention. We do need to see consciously, can we work out what it is? And sometimes, and again, this ties back to the active listening, if we're really listening, we may well find that the question, the right question to ask comes up, the right observation to make. We may even get a sense of what's really going on if we're paying attention and actively listening. Sensory acuity, though, goes beyond that simple sixth sense, but it is that feeling of when things just don't seem quite right, or when there is, and this is the perhaps the more common one, when there is a mismatch between what's being said and the impression, the meaning that's being given. And again, the recurring example on this one, and I'm not alone in using this example, it's when you say to your loved one that you're going to do something, or you're wanting them to do something, or something's going on, and you get the one-word response, fine. And you all know it, I know it, we all know it, I think, that when you get that one-word response, the word itself may mean one thing. The message, though, is the absolute opposite. And we know that because that's a common one, but that's sensory acuity in a nutshell. And again, it's a skill we can learn and practice. Again, by listening, by trusting our unconscious, by recognizing those red flags, those alarm bells. That allows us to communicate better. And sometimes, and this is the really useful thing, that from the perspective of building rapport, sometimes people are unaware of that mismatch. Sometimes people are unaware of what's actually going on for them. And if you can highlight that because you've been listening, because you're tuned into your sensory acuity, you can then ask the relevant question. You can make the pertinent observation. And suddenly you're bringing something into the other person's conscious awareness that they may not have been aware of before. And again, that helps build rapport. So all of that is well and good. But how do you go about doing this? Well, there are a number of quite simple things, or I think they're quite simple things to do. The first of all really is to observe others. Spend a bit of time. Next time you're out and about, just watch people. Observe how people interact. And do you get the sense of that they're in rapport, or do you get the sense that they're not? And if they're in rapport, what's going on? What matching and mirroring are you seeing? What active listening skills are you seeing? How well are people using their sensory acuity? Make the effort. Active listening is simply one of practice. It's learning to quieten your own inner voice, your own inner thoughts. Stop listening for that gap where you can jump in with your contribution and simply focus on what the other person has to say. And notice how much more you understand and how much more awareness you have of what the actual message is, which goes way beyond the words alone. Practice the matching and mirroring. Just notice how, if you're in a room, if you're talking with someone and they adopt a posture, use a gesture, just see how you can match and mirror that, always though below their level of consciousness. And just notice whether that improves the conversation, improves the flow of what's happening, improves the connection between the two of you. See where it takes you. So now just imagine mastering the skills to build rapport. Think about the relationships you've had over the years, the professional ones, the personal ones, the intimate ones. Think about what a difference it may have made if you had these skills at your fingertips and perhaps had been able to approach the relationship in a different way. Would that have made a difference in job interviews, in difficult conversations in the workplace? Would it have improved the family dynamic? Would you be having fewer arguments, fewer fallouts with your partner? Think again about the times when things have gone really well, the people you really connect with and get on well with. Again, whether that's on a professional, a personal, or an intimate level. And now think about the things we've talked about today and how much those were in place, which facilitated all those conversations. Just imagine having those skills. Just imagine how good life could be. And now it's down to you. You take the next step. And you know that you can do it, don't you?